I teach Spanish for native speakers, and there is where I see the most change. My students didn't realize that they have to study Spanish. They know how to speak, they understand everything, but they didn't worry about learning the cultural part and the other cultural parts. If they are Cuban, they were not aware of the Mexican culture, the Spaniard one. So it's amazing what we discover with this LinguaFolio. Because that's the idea of LinguaFolio, opening the window to other cultures and other possibilities. And they didn't realize that learning Spanish is reading a book, not only writing sentences. It's reading a book, is watching a movie, looking for the cultural themes, the accents. So yes, there is where I see the most amazing changes. I'm excited.
We started off with the part, doing the passport, where we talked about, well, what have you done with another language? Now, these guys aren't in high school yet, so they haven't started learning another language formally. And they couldn't remember, some of them, how it had been when they first got here, about exactly how did they learn a language, because now they're kind of in the middle of it, and they never did a lot of thinking. I think if they had had LinguaFolio when they first got here, they would have a very clear idea of how they started to pick up the language. But they didn't really know that. So we started to do a lot of background work where we just talked about cultures. And then they wrote about, in the multicultural piece or the cross-cultural piece, they wrote about their experience with someone else from another culture. And sometimes that person was, at that time, the kids were all Spanish speakers. Sometimes that person was someone even from their own country, but maybe who had stayed back in their native country, whereas they had come here. And now there was a gap or a change in with the same culture, but a change in the approach to life that came about from being exposed to this culture. And so they had begun to make changes. And when they would talk to the person back in the native country, they were beginning to realize that our perspectives are changing. And they would write, so some of them wrote about that. And the part about, well, what did the experience mean to you? And they began to think about, well, what did that mean to me in my life? Where am I in my life right now? So I think the beginning of the LinguaFolio process, figuring out where you are in your life right now, is the beginning to figuring out where you are in your learning right now. And so those two things began to kind of come together. And every time they did some writing, we would sit down with our partners or in groups of 3, and they would edit each other's stuff, look at each other's stuff, make comments to each other about the content of what they were writing. And so it just became a kind of a sharing experience. That became a kind of a natural thing, because now, doing all the other experiences, they were working as a team. And they were all very supportive. We didn't have any, oh, I can do this and you can't do this. They would work together and looking at each other's papers, looking at the I can checklist of the skills. They could help each other figure out what they could really do and what they couldn't. And I think that, the way I began with the cross-cultural pieces and the kids talking together, getting to know each other, I think that's the best way to go about it. At least it seems to me to be the most natural way to go about it, sharing those experiences, then working into the checklist and looking at the papers and trying to think about learning.